lingua regionale come lo provenzale e tu.
I should have shut all the region.
Language is one identity and allows us to express emotion. It makes us laugh, it makes us cry, and it inspires us.
To be or not to be.
When language reaches its highest state, we give it a name that's terrifying and irritating to some: literature. In this form, it gives us voice, personality, and history. All literature does, really, is tell our story, and how to do it justice in 1 hour. This programme isn't about literary criticism or deciding who makes it or who is left out of the great pantheon, nor is it about history. So it's just going to be a very personal journey, and probably you'll disagree with my taste, which is fine, because there's really no right or wrong here. What I'm going to try and explain to you is why certain writing makes me shiver with excitement, and why some makes me want to bury my head in my hands. But more of them later. First, let's just step back and see how it all began.
This is Turkana land in northeast Kenya, not far from where it's believed Homo sapiens originated. The Turkana are a fiercely independent tribe of pastoral nomads whose existence is dependent on their livestock. The menfolk spend much of their spare time and energy planning and then raiding cattle from their neighboring tribe, the Toposa. Understandable, as cattle are the currency to buy yourself a wife and then keep her in beads that are both decorative and a measure of her wealth and status.
Akarna Tokana ka ejang mo Jacob. Ito ni chotongalu. Atopurne ta jigana tamana tamar. Woi, beng mo gbere. Beng mo gbere. Beng mo gbere. Atoti ngi jinga tomem.
This is where it all began, under the shades of trees, around fires, the world over, people telling stories of daring do, love and disappointment, of being and becoming. Here, I'm listening to an extraordinary tale of how the people went on a raid against their wily opponents, the Toposa, and stole off their cattle. May not be the Trojan Wars, but it has its elements of heroism. Of course, they could just as easily be telling stories like how the stars got their shine, or why camels have bad breath. There are many, many stories, but supposedly only 7 real plots.
At a most basic level, a good story needs plot and character. So let's deal with plot first. According to some, they boil down to just these: the quest, rags to riches, comedy, tragedy, rebirth, overcoming the monster, voyage and return. So Hamlet, or its Disney incarnation, the Lion King, is an archetypal voyage and return plot wrapped in a revenge tragedy. But does such thinking even help us navigate our way through literature?
William Goldman, regarded by many as the preeminent Hollywood screenwriter of his time, double Oscar winner, he should know a thing or two. Or maybe not, because perhaps his most famous remark about the Hollywood story mill was that nobody knows anything. The story itself, I suppose, depends on something human. It depends on caring about one or a group of characters, or about some sort of principle like revenge or a quest. I mean, is there any truth in this whole idea that there are basically only, what, 7 plots?
No, I don't think so. I think basically I just, for my sins, I looked at a movie that I wrote, Marathon Man, many, many years ago. And that was based on 2 ideas. One of them was, what would happen if someone in your family wasn't what you thought they were? And the other one was, I was walking on 47th Street, which is still there.
Yes, the Diamond District.
It's the Diamond District. Yeah. And it was a hot day about 40 years ago. And all the people that worked in the Diamond Districts were wearing short sleeve shirts. And you could see all the terrible marks from the concentration camps.
Because they're all Jewish.
Because they were all Jewish, and they all,
had their tattoos.
Had their tattoos on, and I got the notion, what if the world's most wanted Nazi was walking along this street? And then I realized I couldn't figure out why he came. And then because I'm very good on story, I realized he was coming because he needed heart surgery. And then I thought, asshole, what kind of a villain is he if he needs heart surgery?
Yes.
So ultimately I came up with the notion of the diamonds years later, and that was, thank God for Laurence Olivier.
If I can squeeze the secret out, is don't try and second guess the genre that's most popular at the time. Don't try and conform to some apparent rule of storytelling. Go with your gut about...
You've got to try and find something that you can make play. For example, in all the years I've been doing this, I've never done a special effects movie. When people are saying, they're up in a spaceship and Urka comes in, I can't write that shit. Other people can, but I can't. And what you have to try and do is you have to try and figure out some way to make something work that you have confidence in when you're writing it. I was reading about the gentleman who wrote King's Speech. He had a stammer when he was a kid. I mean, who in the name of God thinks there's going to be a successful worldwide movie that wins every honor about a king who has a stammer? I mean, it's the worst idea I ever heard of. But guess what? Yeah. It was a fascinating story.
Yeah.
It really was, and it works.
I suppose you can trace storytelling, certainly in our culture, all the way back to that blind hero, supposedly blind Homer. One wonders from what you've said about Hollywood, if you went with the story of the Odyssey or of the Siege of Troy, having said which, they made a movie about Troy, so maybe Homer still plays.
Well, I remember I was young when I read those two, and they just destroyed me. I remember I had no idea what I was getting into, and I just couldn't stop reading it. I think those fabulous people are fabulous for a reason. Yeah. There's something, I'm going to say something stupid, they were great at story.
Yeah.
I mean, Homer really had fabulous stories to tell.
The Mediterranean is the landscape of Western literature's first, and some would say, most influential works, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. They have a magnificent plot. It features sexual obsession, kidnapping, loyalty, man love, jealousy, war, heroism, and deception. All wrapped up in the greatest road movie of all time. Well, a road movie on the sea.
The Odyssey recounts the exploits and adventures of the Greek general Odysseus, Ulysses in the Roman version of the story, as he tries to get home after the Trojan Wars. It is filled with fabulous encounters, whether with the Cyclops, Circe, the archetypal femme fatale, or adrift on drug-induced happiness with the Lotus Eaters. Homer's genius was to create vivid archetypal scenes that transcended time and place. The Sirens episode is only a few paragraphs long, yet it has become embedded in our collective memory. On his way home, Odysseus has to pass the fabled rocks where the Sirens live. No one has ever lived to tell the tale of what it is the Sirens sing, as their song is so powerful it lures men to their death. But Odysseus is intent on hearing it and surviving.
I took a large round of wax, cut it up small with my sword, and kneaded the pieces with all the strength of my fingers. I took each of my men in turn and plugged their ears with it. They then made me a prisoner on my ship by binding me hand and foot, standing me up by the step of the mast and tying the rope's ends to the mast itself. We made good progress and had just come within call of the shore when the Sirens became aware that a ship was swiftly bearing down upon them and broke into their liquid song. "Draw near," they sang, "illustrious Odysseus, flower of Achaean chivalry, and bring your ship to rest so that you may hear our voices." Lovely voices came to me across the water, and my heart was filled with such a longing to listen that with nod and frown I signed to my men to set me free. But they swung forward to their oars and rowed ahead.
However, when they had rowed past the sirens, and we could no longer hear their voices and the burden of their song, my good companions were quick to clear their ears of the wax I'd used to stop them and to free me from my shackles. And of course, we never learn from Odysseus what that siren call sounds like, but we know what it means. 2 millennia later, James Joyce reinvented that scene and indeed the whole plot of Homer in his masterpiece, Ulysses. David Norris is not only a senator, but also an acclaimed and inspiring Joycean scholar.
I suppose the genius of the book is that he managed to find in a single day in Dublin, Joyce, examples of Odysseus's adventures in the Homeric epic, like the sirens, the escape from Polyphemus, Circe. He found a modern equivalent. It's a tour de force of writing that has since never been matched, I don't think, has it?
I can't think of anything that's been matched. Nobody's tried it in quite the same way.
No.
But I think Joyce had that kind of extraordinary genius. I mean, chapter 4, you hit
Yes.
the kidneys.
Oh.
Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner
Read
organ.
this, because this is where we're introduced to our great hero. Here we go. Do you want to read this for us? Just this opening, because it's such a wonderful introduction to a character.
Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hen cods roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys, which gave to his palate a fine tang of faintly scented urine. Isn't that mouth-watering?
It is mouth-watering. And at first you think, a fine tang of faintly scented urine is supposed to be a good thing, and yet, anybody who eats kidney, there is that. And
yes,
it is
there is.
Faintly scented,
Yeah.
is so right. But as you say, it brings us straight into having met characters who are very intellectual. You think, oh, this book's going to be about very smart people who quote Shakespeare all the time. And suddenly you hit this man Bloom, with his love of his... and he's going about making breakfast for his wife, setting things on the tray, the cat's running, stalking him.
And the cat is
Beautiful
the
cat.
most wonderful detail, because when he looks at the cat first, the cat looks at him back and says, meow, M-K-G-N-E-O.
Yeah.
And then when he says, milk for the pussins, and he leans down to pour milk for the pussins, the cat says almost the same,
Yes.
but not quite.
Added
There's
an
an
R.
R, and that
Indicates
is the cat.
satisfaction.
There's a communication between them, and the whole book is about communication.
Now, a lot of people have picked up Ulysses and been baffled by it, or thought, oh, I might dip in and slowly get the odd sentence, but I'm never going to understand it. How would you suggest they go about reading it?
Jump in. Don't expect to understand everything, because the beautiful thing about Joyce is you don't, and you never come to the end of it. It's an inexhaustible treasure, and read it aloud.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what accent. I mean, the moment on the Strand, for example, where Stephen has been trying to make a note of the sound of a wave, it looks like the typewriter letting us sneeze, but it's exactly the sound if you say it. Most people will be put off looking at S-E-E, S-O-O, H-R-S-S, E-I-S-S, O-O-O-O-S. They say, well, hump that for a lark. But if you hear it, listen, a four-worded wave speech. It's exactly the sound of a wave. And Joyce does that all the way through. Yeah. And, Budgeon tells a story of meeting Joyce in Zurich, and Joyce was looking pleased with himself, and he said, just good day's work, Joyce? And Joyce said, oh, yeah. Write a chapter, a couple of pages, paragraph, a sentence. And Joyce said, I had the words in the sentence yesterday, but I got the order right today. I mean, he's a mosaic artist.
Yeah.
Every tiny little colored stone is in exactly the right place to give the effect that Joyce wanted.
The right word in the right order, as Joyce said, is as good a definition of good writing as I can think of. Le mot juste, as Flaubert would have it, and it's that precision in creating a whole world through the inventiveness of language that provokes and delights the mind and makes great literature so memorable.
Joyce had this extraordinary ear for the musicality of Dublin language. I mean, things like a word like how and ever. So, how and ever. I mean, you can just see the way the body fits into that. Or when Bloom is being attacked in the Citizen episode, and a torch shouts out, "Hey, mister, your fly is open, mister." And that second mister is the perfect pointing and resolution of the line melodically. And Joyce could hear that.
He had that kind of ear, didn't he?
Yes, and every kind of Dublin saying, like that he'd suck whiskey off a sore leg, these are things. Joyce kind of almost collected these things. And I often think that subsequent writers must have thought it was a terribly unfair competition because Joyce was so terribly greedy.
Yes, he was.
Left
He was a
almost
hoarder.
nothing behind for other people.
A hoarder of linguistic treasure. Oh, look, here we are. Is this lamb's kidneys?
It is indeed.
Fantastic.
And a nice bit of gorgonzola.
And are they faintly scented with urine?
A glass of burgundy.
And a glass of burgundy would be lovely, thank you. So we're now going to have a proper Bloom feast, because he comes in and that's what he has, gorgonzola.
Yes, it is. Gorgonzola and good red burgundy wine.
I think he calls it the feety savour of green cheese, doesn't he? Feety. Shall we see if there's a faint scent of urine?
Well, I think we will, yes. And I wasn't going to, but the smell is so delicious.
It is good, isn't it? Here we are.
Lovely.
Delicious.
And tender.
Very tender.
Ulysses was the book I chose as my desert island disc. It's one I can go back to again and again, and not only for the sheer joy of his language, but also the humanity of his flawed and unheroic characters. Joyce's books only sell thousands, but one of his contemporaries sells hundreds of millions. The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy are the second and third best-selling novels of all time, just after Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. New Zealand-based director Peter Jackson has devoted many years to bringing J.R.R. Tolkien's books to the screen. And for him, Tolkien's admixture of Norse, Middle English and Anglo-Saxon is one key to the enduring success of both the books and the films. Roads go ever, ever on under cloud and under star, yet feet that wandering have gone return at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known.
I wondered how much you felt, because you adapt these, how much the language matters to Tolkien, because I happen to think he's an extremely good writer of English. I mean, just at the level of the sentence, that you really can't improve much, can you?
I mean, it was one of the decisions we made when we were adapting Lord of the Rings, is that we tried to work as much of his language into the script as we could. I just think that one of the beauties of the book of Lord of the Rings, and I actually think it ultimately worked in the movie too, is that they're talking in a language that is beautiful and poetic, and even though it's not one that we're used to hearing on the street, you understand it. It becomes accessible in a funny kind of a way. And I mean, what Tolkien did great with his stories, and especially his use of language, is that he treated them as historical. Yeah. You know, I think that's the way that we found. You know, that was the door that we entered when we went into the movies. Is that this isn't made up? It's not. You know, it's not a piece of gobbledygook, you know, set on the planet Zog or some such thing. I mean, every name, every place name, every plant name that Tolkien wrote about, he based in some form of a language. It was a language sometimes that he created himself. It was an archaic, old Middle English form of language.
Like a sort of Oakenshield or something like that.
Yeah, everything meant something. Everything actually had a reality, and it was almost like he did literally create a history.
What I also admire about Tolkien is, like Joyce, his protagonists are reluctant heroes, grounded in a reality, no matter how fantastical the world they inhabit.
But for Tolkien, the real heroes, the true heroes, were the simple folk, the decent folk. There's I think, you know, what Tolkien's saying ultimately is to be a real hero if you're good, if you're decent, if you are prepared to offer yourself up to protect your fellow friend. And you have to wonder how much of that came from his experiences in the trenches in World War I.
Jackson is also known as a schlock horror director, where plot is all, and I wonder if, like me, he shares my unabashed love for the master of the genre, Stephen King.
As you say, I think he's one of the great storytellers of our time, of any time, really. And partly because he's so obsessed with storytelling.
That's right. The other thing about Stephen King, which I think is fantastic, is that I don't think he ever invents a character. Every single character he writes about, and these are good and bad, they're sane and they're insane, are an element of him. That he's not afraid to dig into the dark depths of his worst imagination and create a character out of that. So he literally mines what he considers the most evil part of himself, and he creates an absolute psychopath. But you know it's coming from a real place. Whereas you get somebody who says, now I'm going to write the most evil psychopath in the world, and they kind of make stuff up. And you read it, and it might be horrifying, but you're not connecting with it because you don't recognise any of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, there's another of my favourite writers who in his day was as popular as King, is as brilliant with words as Joyce, and like Tolkien and Homer, created fantastical imaginary worlds. Well, who could that be?
You know, if I could time travel, this is where I would come to, 410 years ago, and I would pop into one of the taverns that line the Thames here, and I would listen to the language of the street, and I would see if I could bump into Shakespeare, Marlowe, Tennant, Kidd, Middleton, Webster, Johnson. This period, the 1590s to 1600, saw the greatest flowering of theatre that the world has ever seen. Poets and playwrights seemed to bubble from this town. Shakespeare alone had a vocabulary more than 6 times the average of 10,000 that you and I might have. He introduced 3,000 words into the English language.
What distinguishes Shakespeare from all his colleagues, aside from his prodigious output, was his concentration on character, often at the expense of plot, which he was content to lift from others. Hamlet, a case in point, which was a reworking of the Spanish tragedy by Thomas Kidd.
It was a radical exploration of a single human soul in a way that hadn't been done before either. But there hadn't been that type of navel-gazing, soul-searching type of hero. It was much more objective, as he called it, whereas Hamlet suddenly does something which nobody had ever seen before, I don't think, in quite such an extent.
Growing up, when you started acting, did you always think that's one day?
I suppose, but only in that sense that it's seen as one of those kind of Olympic events for an actor.
Yeah,
you know,
I was about to say opening the Bowling for England, but that's rather inappropriate in your case.
Well, quite, yes.
Keeping goal for Scotland or something.
Scotland, yes, it's one of those. It's one of the sort of marker points, isn't it? I guess.
Dorothy Parker said, "I go and see Hamlet every 10 years, and I find Shakespeare's rewritten it in my absence."
Well, I think that's absolutely it. Yeah, and every time you see it, and every actor who does it, and I think the thing about Hamlet, whenever you come to it, and whoever comes to it, it doesn't resist, because there's so much in it, and because there's so much scope in it. Sort of everyone can throw something at it and reveal something new, I think.
You know, when you first sat in the rehearsal room for a read-through or whatever and had to say to be or not to be.
That is the cliche.
Yeah, yes. Quite. Did you rush through it and think,
well, we didn't. I think our director was savvy enough that we didn't sit down and do a read-through straight away, so we sort of circled around it and took the curse off it. But yeah, I mean, those so many lines are so well worn.
Cruel to be kind, method in his madness, all that sort of thing. To the manner born.
They just keep coming. And you think, how do I begin? And of course you just begin by not worrying about it is all you can, which it sounds terribly simple and isn't, but there's sort of no way around it other than just going, well, this character happens to say these lines here, and they're the first time they've ever been said. And
yes, that's right.
I was in front of university students the other day. Wonderful. Lovely.
Yeah.
And I said, let's take what is now most... you'll be bored, as I say, to be or not to be.
Oh, yes.
You'll be bored. You're bored shitless now, as I say it, right? And I took out a Magnum gun. And I fired it at the ceiling, and half the bloody ceiling fell down. And I went click, click, click to blow my head off. To be or not to be? The fucking hell! Ah! Oh, this is what it's about! Yeah. And I put this magnum. Of course, I put the plaster up there, and it was a blank.
But my God, you got their attention.
Got their attention.
And that's and it is a speech, to be or not to be, that, as you say, is so worn down and eroded by familiarity.
Yes.
But in fact, it is about exactly that. It is, do I do this?
Yes.
Do I pull the trigger?
That's right.
What is it about it? Is it simply because it is the question that a lot of human beings face, whether to end life?
It's such a simple question. Yeah. So I was thinking, well, what's all the fuss about? I mean, I mean, do I kill myself or not? And it didn't sort of hit home until well through the run, when I suddenly thought the calmness of that soliloquy, the self-control of that soliloquy, which is unlike the other ones, is part of that concentration of energy. And if you get it right, you can feel the energy of the theatre concentrating to a point.
And you can feel that they're hearing it for the first time, which would be the real achievement,
prize,
wouldn't it?
He doesn't know what to say, to be or not to be. So he has to find it right at that moment. Yeah. That might be all he'd say.
Yes.
That's the question. Now, if you pause too long there, as I did once in Pittsburgh, and there was a person sitting, a little old lady, and her husband sitting around. Yeah, no, I came up right next to her in my pajamas, all like tearful and cry. I said, to be or not to be? And then I thought for a moment, what does that mean? And she turned to her husband and said, that is the question. And,
that's very touching.
And he woke up, I think. And so everyone heard it and laughed a bit. Yeah. But I was able to say, that is the question.
Oh, right, you sort of joined in her thing.
Yeah.
You affirmed her.
That is the question.
That is,
You're right. It was a wonderful moment eventually, actually. That is the question.
What is your feeling about Shakespearean language? Have you always found it a simple and straightforward matter to engage with the verse? Because sometimes it's difficult. It does take a bit of unpicking in terms of just meaning sometimes.
Well, I get sometimes very upset the way it's caned. And then people say, well, is language. Language? He has invented our language. He's so ultra-modern. Yeah. He's so accessible. There is a power in the verse. Oh, for the muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for the stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the... So it has a bounce and a power. And so Shakespeare has a reality. For God's sake! But here's a line from Shakespeare. Light thickens. Yeah. Light thickens. Yeah. Where did that come from? This is why I will defend Shakespeare. Yeah. This is why they need to look at it and bring it in.
We were very lucky because presumably we had teachers at school who managed to inspire me, passionately inspire me about Shakespeare, and then it becomes completely compulsory.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I am a little fearful that our education system makes it very frightening and off-putting to people who, like me, who couldn't speak till I was 7 years old, couldn't be understood by anyone. I spoke so fast. I speak fast still now, and maybe I still can't be understood.
But me too. I had to have elocution lessons to slow me down.
Yeah, me too. I had the same thing. Sent to rooms with two-way mirrors and made to speak with other kids who couldn't speak. And learning this stuff by heart and speaking it was the first time that I was able to express all kinds of things in front of people that I couldn't. My mind just went too fast.
Yeah. I think in the final analysis, he is. We've got our author. Of the Blue Planet has its author. Yes. And it is Shakespeare, William Shakespeare.
Yes. I count myself exceedingly lucky to have been given English as my mother tongue. There's no doubt that Flaubert, Tolstoy, Goethe, and any number of other writers are immense talents. But yes, Shakespeare is our planet's author. And I'm not talking jingoism here. He just covers all the bases. Over at the Comédie Française in Paris, they, of course, revere their literary giants, Racine, Molière, Corneille, Marivaux, but did they also recognize Shakespeare as the master? Guillaume Gallienne is France's foremost classical actor and has played Shakespeare along with Molière and the rest. What does he make of Hamlet's most famous soliloquy?
Theatre is to be or not to be. How does that sound in French? How does that go?
Être ou ne pas être, là est la question. But there's different theories. Actually, Daniel Misgish believes that it's not to be or not to be. That is the question for him. He believes it's to be or not to be. That is the question.
Whoa! This is an example of what you're saying about the reinterpretation that French allows it.
Well, it still englobes what's suggested in the first version, but it brings it somewhere else also.
Do you think there's a freedom that you can have if it's in another language? You can translate it, and it may not have the richness of the original English, but that you can just let go of having to pronounce every syllable and give it a...
I'm not so sure.
No.
I still prefer Shakespeare in English.
You do, yeah.
I learn a lot from how... when you know how to act Shakespeare, I think you can act anything.
If I were to put to you an absurd question that if either Molière or Shakespeare had to be expunged from the cultural pantheon, if they'd no longer existed...
I would keep Shakespeare by far.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's richer for me. Shakespeare, you can reckon yourself in something human, in quality or defect, but it's higher. It goes higher. It goes far away for me. Yeah. It makes me travel much more. Yeah.
Translation is a tricky area. Can you even begin to grasp the genius of Shakespeare in another language, especially one as different, say, as Mandarin Chinese? Entrepreneur and aesthete Sir David Tang and his old school chum Johnson Chang have a view.
尋生係尋死，這才是正事，or 這才是命題。So, should we seek life or should we seek death? And this is the main issue.
That's fun. So that rather gives the game away. It's as if Hamlet comes on stage and says, "Shall I commit suicide or not?"
It gives the game away completely.
Yes, whereas to be or not to be is a sort of gentle easing into the whole sort of meditation that he then goes through.
The trouble is that the word to be does not exist in China. Anybody translating to be or not to be must use the same verb and just put a not in front of it. But we have never seen a translation that does that.
Isn't that interesting?
The Chinese just gives the game away.
Here's another question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. That's not an easy one.
I can only do over a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of inventions.
No, but we meant in Chinese.
No, it's just Chinese.
You're not supposed to mock your own language. That's outrageous. That's very funny. What I love about Sir David Tang is that he's funny and utterly unafraid to say whatever he likes. He reminds me in some ways of those delectable, eccentric characters in PG Wodehouse. Now, Wodehouse is one of my all-time favourite authors, and while many might consider him about as far from Hamlet or James Joyce as you could get, I would disagree. I love them equally, and that's the beauty of great writing. It comes in so many guises.
One of the best biographies of P.G. Wodehouse ever written is by Robert McCrum, so it gave me great pleasure to catch up with him and have a conversation about our beloved author.
Robert, when people hear the word Wodehouse, they think the voice of the upper-class twit and that it's a world of silly asses and country houses, and they might be put off by that because they're not aware that the great secret of Wodehouse is not the characters and the plots, wonderful as they are, but the language.
Yeah, he's a virtuoso of language, and he revels in it. But it's drawn on Old English, Latin and Greek, Middle English, Jane Austen, Dickens, Tennyson. These are all his subjects, and he loves American slang, poetry of everyday speech, and he just loves. He's got some great. I want to read you one bit, if I may. This is one of the most brilliant opening lines of any Wodehouse. This is the luck of the Bodkins, and he goes, "Into the face of the young man who sat on the terrace of the Hotel Magnifique at Cannes, there had crept a look of furtive shame. The shifty, hangdog look which announces that an Englishman is about to speak French.
That's right. That's so good. And there's another character who says he doesn't try and speak French properly because if it does, it gives him a nosebleed.
That's very good. But that sentence could only have been written by somebody who knew the classics. But at the same time, as this wonderful language, he omits two of the great themes of literature. There's no sex and there's no death.
The only use for a bed in Wodehouse is for someone to hide something under.
Or to put a hot water bottle in there.
That's right. To booby-trap them by putting a darning needle at the end of a broom handle.
He's a kind of Zelig-like character. You know, he passes through this 20th century, this incredible, 1900 to 1945 is one of the great half-centuries in terms of drama of any historical period. He passes through it untouched. He never grows up.
It's as if every sentence you read of his, he's looked at it and thought, that's just a man crossing the room and sitting down in a chair. There must be another way, you know. So he doesn't put the £5 note into his pocket, he trousers it. So to trouser becomes a verb, which is fantastic.
Words for drunk alone, here's a list of them. Awash, boiled, fried, lathered, illuminated, oiled, ossified, pie-eyed, polluted, primed, scrooched, stinko, squiffy, tanked, and woozled.
That's fantastic.
All made up.
Yeah, apparently. Wodehouse is most popular with prisoners and people in hospitals. And actually, when you think about it, I can't think of a greater compliment for a writer. No. I mean, if you can make prisoners and the ill happy, then you've spoken to people who are low and you've warmed them just by language.
The number of people who I've encountered, having written this biography, who tell me that when they're feeling down, they turn to Wodehouse. I don't know whether this works for you.
Absolutely does. Yeah.
Turns to Wodehouse to cheer themselves. So they'll read either a favourite Wodehouse or a new Wodehouse, and there are plenty of those, to cheer themselves up.
Yeah.
George Orwell was a contemporary of PG Wodehouse. He was educated at Eton, but he rejected his caste and his class. Even his rather unprepossessing name of Eric Blair was changed. Politics were his theme. Animal Farm and 1984 have rightly become classics, warning us of the dangers of totalitarianism.
Wodehouse and Orwell may seem like unlikely literary bedfellows, but they share a concern for using the English language accurately and precisely. But if Wodehouse never embraces change, Orwell is all about change, and his dystopian 1984 world sees a vision of the future that reduces English to a bare minimum, with the aim of reducing emotions and thought to the same. So with Newspeak, if you can't say it, then you can't think it or feel it.
Newspeak was what Orwell coined as a title for this particular political language and a tyranny that he imagined as being in 1984.
I mean, as ever, Orwell has written better about English than anyone else. And that particular invention is fantastic because it's very, very simple, all of Newspeak. You know, like doublethink, they're all very simple sets of words. But the whole point of all of them is to be euphemistic and to prevent you thinking about the truth. And becomes really nasty when it's in military situations. So you have collateral damage, which means dead civilians. And, you know, you don't really want to think about that. Rendition. Yes. Oh, someone's been rendered somewhere. Someone's been taken on a plane to somewhere where you can torture them. Yes. You know, it's all of these words are deliberately vague and bland to stop you thinking that's really not what we should be doing.
Ian Hislop, editor of the satirical magazine Private Eye, shares Orwell's love of clarity with language and his devoted columns to exposing humbug and the inglorious use of language.
So these columns tend to start because people are irritated with particular words or a particular sort of jargon. And the management speak, we originally called it Burt speak, after John Burt, because the place where this sort of management drivel reaches its apogee is the BBC. I mean, well away from the cameras and the creative process, there are decks and decks of people who are telling each other about traction and rolling out 360-degree platforms, and this is taking up a lot of their time. This I always thought was the classic Burt speak. A lot of these, a lot of the jargon's focused in job adverts, but you have to guess this one. Procurement is targeted with delivering savings on generic goods and services pan-BBC through a competitive category management initiative and driving compliance. The category manager, logistics, ground transport, is responsible to the head of production and logistics and senior category manager, logistics. And guess what that is a job for?
I know the word logistics means haulage, so is it something to do with transport?
No, it's booking
Lorries.
taxis.
That's
it.
Taxis that another manager has already decided BBC executives shall never, ever use because it might get into the Daily Mail. That is astonishing.
But we had a classic about 3 or 4 years ago of we called it neologisms, but it was everything was the new something else.
Yes. Everything was the new black for a time, wasn't
everything was the new black. Botox is the new heroin. Opera's the new cocaine. Spelling's the new punctuation. Checking your inbox is the new going out. Oh, here's a good one. At the risk of going into private eye, I think white pepper is the new black pepper, says Stephen Fry in Sainsbury's magazine.
I did know what I was doing, but it was absurd, of course. So that's the point. All these aren't things you've made up just to be amusing. They are genuine.
No, and that is the great joy of the real quote, is they're always funnier than anything you could make up. Alexander Pope, I think he wrote this marvellous essay on criticism. I mean, if you want to talk about how well language can be used, he said, true wit is nature to advantage dressed, what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed. And that's it. You want someone to tell you something, you think, oh, yes, that must be right. I've thought of that, but I've never said it that well.
Yeah.
And that, in a nutshell, is what it's all about. It's why we turn to the poets in times of love, death, joy, and grief. They just do it better than anyone else.
He was my north, my south, my east, my west, my working week, my Sunday best, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love could last forever, but I was wrong. The stars are not needed now. Put them out, every one. Pack up the moon, dismantle the sun. Pour away the oceans, sweep up the woods, for nothing now can ever come to any good. That poem was by WH Auden, but you may well know it better from the film 4 Weddings and a Funeral, where it was magnificently used in the funeral of the title. It's extraordinary how something can have such impact, be so succinct, and have such emotional truth behind it. Maybe it's something to do with the very nature of a poem, as Joyce would say, the right words in the right order.
Richard Curtis, old friend, creator of Blackadder, and of course writer of the most successful rom-coms of our generation, from Notting Hill, Love Actually, and of course 4 Weddings and that now famous funeral.
Not really. I mean, tragically in my life, in every film I've ever done, the actual single best moment in the film has nothing to do with me. That's always the case.
Why did you choose that poem? And secondly, were you astonished by that response?
Yeah, I mean, I chose the poem because I didn't feel up to the job.
Right, I see.
Writing a moving funeral, so I thought I'd better leave it to a better man. But also, I mean, the fact that I knew it was in a funny way because I'd always been told I should study Auden and love Auden, and I didn't understand most of his poems. Right. And I remember being very thrilled when I came across that one. And I think it's no coincidence that it's, in fact, as you say, called Funeral Blues, and it's, in fact, a lyric. Yes. It was meant to be sung. Right. And that sort of is probably, for me, quite symptomatic of the fact that I've got a great passion about lyrics, in a way more than poems.
It's become the thing for funerals, hasn't it? For music to be chosen, songs to be chosen. I mean, there are ones that are
They're cliches, but one shouldn't mock them, you know. I did it my way, and je ne regrette rien.
Angels, I believe, is number one at funerals these days.
They do have top 10 lists, don't they? I heard someone had Countdown playing when his coffin went through the curtains. It's another way of doing it. But still, people read poems. There are a few. But you feel that actually lyrics have more, I won't say more power, but that they do the job better, they can express emotion that everybody can understand. Is that the...
I don't know. I mean, I think the things about poems is people don't have as passionate access to them now as they did. I mean, people were apparently outraged by the work of Byron, and people knew about it, and they were more famous. And the thing is, it's hard for a poem to break through, and I think perhaps what happened on the Four Weddings one was it was a rare example of a poem being put out to enough people to get a passionate reaction. And of course, poems are often perfect, word for word. Pop lyrics are often not perfect, but they are known by so many people, and they've got the passion and perfection of the music behind them. You know, there also are geniuses working in the world of pop lyrics now. Paul Simon has written some very extraordinary things. The Boxer is very extraordinary. Every day I think of that line, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest, as you go through life and realise people are only hearing a bit of what you say because it's the bit that suits them. It's part of the fabric of your life now. Now, if you pick a poem, it may be the first time someone's heard it, they've got to piece it together.
Yes.
Whereas if you have, there's a song by Coldplay called Fix You, and you can't do much better than I will try to fix you after terrible sorrows occurred. It's got a tremendous potency, and the fact that the lyrics may not be as well crafted, the compensation of the beauty of the tune is enough to turn it back into something deeper.
And I suppose there's the feeling that you and your whole generation heard that song together, so it has a sort of binding effect.
Yeah, you know, if you've stood in a stadium with 45,000 other people who know those words, they become, it's a Nuremberg rally of pop.
So that's it. There really are no rules. There is no right and wrong as to what makes good or bad writing, and all I can urge you to do is to read and read some more, for therein dwells the story of us all. Much of our extraordinary ability with and delight in language has ended up here, on the page, recorded forever, for us and for our ancestors. It has the power to move us, console us, and inspire us. Without doubt, it is our species' supreme achievement. It is our glory.